Hey everybody. So I was waking up today looking at my YouTube For You page. I always like to consume various different kinds of religion content, atheism content, free speech content to get to know the news and what's going on with various content creators and what's happening on the day to day. I pay attention to numerous different creators, people I agree with, people who I don't agree with, and someone who I agreed with for a very long time is Carl Benjamin, also known as Sargon of Akkad. He started out as a prominent atheist YouTuber nearly a decade ago. And then, once a lot of free speech and woke related issues were starting to pop up into the limelight in the Western world, Sargon of Akkad, also known as Carl Benjamin, became a leading voice in kind of bridging that gap on YouTube between atheist content creation and woke and anti woke content creation. And I very much admired the man for a very long time. He's known for defending Jordan Peterson once he started to have his early rise to fame. He has platformed a lot of great people over the years as well. And I've had a lot of positive things to say about him, even when I didn't agree with him on certain policy positions. I always respected the fact that he was one of our guys, one of our big atheists who simultaneously cares about the future of Western civilization. And unfortunately, with a recent video that came out, he appeared on Lauren Chen's YouTube channel. His views on atheism have unfortunately been gradually changing to where I think we at Atheists for Liberty need to make a little bit of a debunking video or response video to him. I have great guy, fellow content creator, but also staffer at AFL to join us to talk about this kind of stuff. Joining me is James Cowell. He's our national campus organizer at AFL. How you doing, James?
I'm doing pretty good, Tom. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you coming on at a moment's notice. We've already tried to get this reaction going because we want to respond in real time.
Mm-hmm.
You, like me, are a fellow Zoomer, consumer of content. You know a lot of the issues. You're helping us with a lot of future AFL branding surrounding these issues, and I can see you just getting just as annoyed as myself. So I appreciate you coming on a moment's notice to talk about these issues.
Of course.
It's going to be a bumpy ride of a video, but I think we got to start chiming in a little bit more on this kind of nonsense. So let's get in on it. Firstly, I want to talk about a lot of the positive contributions that Sargon, aka Carl Benjamin, has had when it comes to some of the things we work on at Atheists for Liberty. For instance, I'll go ahead real quick, share my tabs here. This is just a screenshot from Sargon's channel years ago. I brought David Silverman, former president of American Atheists and now advisory board chairman of Atheists for Liberty, onto Sargon's channel. I helped get him on to when he was fighting back against false allegations made by woke people against him. Sargon was happy to platform David Silverman. They had a wonderful near hour-long discussion, and I saw that as an amazing win, connecting more atheists together with anti-woke people, really getting this kind of new anti-woke atheist movement aligned. And then soon Atheists for Liberty even started premiering as an organization. Fast forward around, a year and a half later, I'm going to stop sharing and then share again here. We got Carl Benjamin giving some positive remarks about Atheists for Liberty in our defense of Richard Dawkins. Woke activists went after Richard Dawkins a few years ago, took away his 1996 Humanist of the Year award for standing up simply for biology, like the biologist he is. And this is what Carl Benjamin actually had to say about our statement.
I have to give the non-woke atheists their due credit here because they deserve it. Because there was a general and a very quite broad response and rejection of the American Humanist Association. The first one, though, is a group that I'd like to promote, which is Atheists for Liberty, which is how I describe myself if I had to put that kind of label on it. Where do you fall? Well, I'm an atheist and I want liberty. End of story. So, and I have to say their position was exactly the same as mine, really. Dawkins' tweets were not bigotry against those who identify as transgender, nor anyone in any particular racial group. From the perspective of an open-minded individual such as Dawkins, he was merely questioning these topics from a rational, scientific perspective. Just from a perspective that demands logical consistency, which you would think would be the scientific rational atheist view. Atheists for Liberty stands in support of Richard Dawkins, the many millions of atheists who share his perspective, which I'm sure they do. In the years leading up to the division within the atheist community and the resulting loss of influence for atheism, and I think that's true, Dawkins was attacked by woke extremists and movement infiltrators. These attacks, once launched by mere bloggers, turned into condemnations and negative actions by large organizations. The latest attack is from the American Humanist Association Board of Directors with their decision in 2021 to withdraw the 1996 Humanist of the Year award given to Dawkins. Additional attacks were recently published against Dawkins by other organizations, going down a path that will only lead to the continued decline of the movement of atheism. And they're right. They're absolutely right. The atheist movement was complete. It was very, very powerful 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago. Very powerful. Now it's nowhere. It's nothing and no one cares about it. Why? Because it was ruined by social justice activists who are bringing in a particular ethical view of the world that leads to us saying you're not allowed to think. How dare you question this thing? But more than that, why did atheism collapse into social justice? It's a very long answer to this question that I'm not going to answer here, but to summarize it, it's the purely materialistic view of atheism that has of the individual that was used to eject God, the supernatural, has also been used to eject the metaphysical conception of the individual. And there is a metaphysical conception of the individual. This is where the atheists went wrong, but this is why the left can rush in with its purely materialistic Marxist garbage and go, yeah, let me tell you about black bodies. No, tell me about black people. I mean, the very term people, a person, is more than merely the material atoms of the thing. And this is the problem. And maybe they couldn't avoid it, but maybe it's something that's untenable and will demand that atheism continues to collapse into social justice unless an alternative secular view of what it is to be a human is presented. But again, I won't go into it here. Let's go to some of the reactions. So you got.
So just to chime in a little bit on that. I don't agree with everything that Carl Benjamin said there, but I agree with the vast majority. And the 2021 Carl Benjamin still would have definitely supported our efforts at Atheists for Liberty. I actually wrote that defense of Richard Dawkins. So when he was screen sharing on Lotus Eaters, he was screen sharing something written by me actually. And I think even later on in that clip, he says he considers himself to be an atheist for liberty, that we are totally in line with him, that he is one of us. So I don't agree with his kind of view that we have to all embrace the metaphysical or whatever. But on the most part, he was with us. And that was great. That was awesome. We can all have our sort of disagreements, but Carl Benjamin was still this cool guy that was supporting non-woke atheists being non-woke atheists. Very awesome. But unfortunately, he's been going down, I think, a path of just rejecting atheism and quite frankly, attacking atheism. So he talks about in that clip about, a need for that, alternate secular viewpoint. That's us. That's us. We exist and we're growing. But unfortunately, him and some others that I've very much emulated, I know many of you that are watching this have emulated, have kind of gone down this cultural religion kind of path, which is just a dumb waste of time. It makes my job harder. It conflicts with the knowing that atheism and secularism is just rising, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And Sargon, unfortunately, he went on Lauren Chen's channel to really say some things I really didn't like him saying. But before I go into that, James, any thoughts on what you saw so far?
Well, from that take, it really does nearly sound like the Sargon of old a little bit. I mean, I remember one of the first videos I saw from Sargon was discussing how the progressive and regressive left became the religious right. The thumbnail was Christopher Hitchens, actually, and it was just a discussion that the narrative has totally switched in the last couple of years, and that's completely correct. And I think him saying that he totally agrees with our position, or your position specifically, since you wrote the piece, it's really brightening to see. However, you can even tell in that clip, even though he didn't really get to the bottom of it, he still is beginning to have some issues with the underlying system of atheism and sort of what it creates, and something else that he wasn't getting at that clip yet. So I think this metamorphosis has it didn't happen overnight. It's been slowly happening in time, but I'm sure we'll get to that as the video progresses in the Lauren Chen segment. So
yeah, I totally agree with you too about like how Sargon, especially in those early years, was saying, look at this regressive left. It is religious. It is religious in nature. He was saying he didn't like the woke people. I remember he favored one of the top comments on either the
Mhm.
David Silverman video he did years ago or a few other videos where he was basically going after this social justice kind of religion because they defend religion. They defend religion the most, and that's what got people like Carl Benjamin and Sargon annoyed at what this regressive left or social justice or whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it has become. That was one of the reasons why I started to get annoyed. They defended the most brutal aspects of theocracy and religious superstition as long as it fit their pipeline of intersectionality or their pyramid of intersectionality. And so it's like you have these people, they went from not liking the regressives because they were too religious to wanting people to be religious because they
Mhm.
happen to not be regressives. You know, it's given me
I
the
think
biggest headache as president.
I I quite think it has a lot to do with sort of losing the general thread, and the feeling of hopelessness that I'm sure somebody like Carl, who has been fighting this fight for an incredibly long time, and I have really truly been interested in the subject, even, you know. But I'm pretty sure he's very black pilled on things. But I think his prescription for the antidote to the problem is completely incorrect. And I think we'll get into that for sure. But I empathize with how he must feel, but I think he's prescribing yet another poison that could kill you more than save you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you on that. Half this content on this channel so far has become the anti-grifting channel. You know, it's unfortunate, but because we're seeing a very dangerous trend where you have some of these champions, so-called champions of Enlightenment values, now turning back against the Enlightenment in this new mucky heap of what we call modern day politics now. And it's something I give no quarter to anyone on any side who starts to adopt these anti-enlightenment views, including people who I once very much emulated. I say this with respect to all the past achievements that Carl has done towards advancing anti-woke or non-woke atheism. So this is a clip that Lauren Shen released on her channel today, I guess, of an appearance that Carl Benjamin went on a few days ago. So like they're clipping stuff out, you know, putting them out. And this is what I woke up to seeing today. I did not see the clip in its entirety. I paused like immediately after seeing it and just started looking at the comments because I wanted both you and I, James, to get a fresh look as to what was said. But I already, I don't even have to. I can already make a good prediction as to what's going to be said. It's going to be an anti-atheism video. So let's just get right into it and let's respond here. So the title of this clip: liberals called atheism dangerous and they were right. Oh boy, here we go.
The early liberals were well aware that atheism was dangerous to the liberal project. They were well aware that, I mean, John Locke thought that atheism should be illegal as well as Catholicism. But he was just, yeah, I know, right? He was attacked by idealists like Berkeley, saying, look, if you create a mechanical universe, then God will die in the minds of men because he's not necessary for the world, for the universe to continue functioning. And Locke just like, no, that's not going to happen. Well, that has happened. That's exactly what's happened. I'm one of those products. I'm an atheist. You know, I didn't choose to be. I was just raised in an atheist society, and this is just how I came out. And so it is absolutely the case.
May I just want to briefly say, notice how he says, you know, I just like happen to be raised as an atheist, and this is just how I came out, as if that's not even something to be proud of anymore. You know, I'm so sorry that I just happened to be born this way. My apologies, everybody. Please don't get offended at me for that. You know, it's very similar to how woke people would apologize in an intersectional game. I happen to be born in this conservative background, or I happen to be born white or male or whatever. You know, it's just now being done for the other side of things. It's just. Yeah.
And I want to make another point before we continue. This is just something that I remember I initially saw because, like you, I only watched the first portion of this clip. He brings up the fact that Locke himself, the father of liberalism, was against atheism. He wanted atheists to be locked up. I fail to understand why that's important in the grand scheme of things. Sure, Locke is the father of liberalism. That's great, and I'm very thankful to Locke for his contributions to philosophy. I consider myself a classical liberal in a lot of respects still. However, that's to me is very similar to saying that Isaac Newton discovered the theory, he came up with the theory of gravity. However, he also liked alchemy, and so we must take that into account. Okay, well, no, I don't really care what his thoughts on that were, as long as he contributed one thing that I think is worth our time, which in this case is liberalism. So,
and then going back into talking about the Enlightenment liberal thinkers, a lot of them were deists back in the day, in the 18th century. I can bet you that if they were around in the 21st century, they wouldn't even be deists; they'd be atheists. So you also, I hate to sound like a woke person or whatever, but context and perspective of the time actually does play a role here. Deism, for many rational thinkers at the time, was the logical conclusion, because our scientific advancements haven't caught up so much enough for where we'd even question in society the existence of the supernatural at all yet. So,
yes.
And then also, I could be wrong, but isn't Carl Benjamin now going on this tour of now going after classical liberalism, now going after those old liberals? So you have this clip, liberals called atheism dangerous, and they were right. It's like, if that's the case, no, they were wrong. They were wrong. Oh, but this is the one time where you guys happen to agree with the classical liberals now.
Yes.
I don't even like making this content half the time, because I just have to endure seeing, Carl Benjamin, this big anti-woke atheist for a long time, saying stuff like this. Only 42 seconds in so far, guys, and already I'm getting a headache. But let's keep going.
This has happened. So Christians, when I say, well, look, liberalism is wrong at the foundations, they don't get upset, because they have a moral foundation of their own that is separate to liberalism. However, with the materialist liberal atheist and all of the dogmatic atheists, liberals, you'll notice, are atheists. You'll notice that every single one of these hardcore liberal activists in any stripe, whether it's the radical communist progressive or the James Lindsay types, they're all atheists.
Oh, let's get into this. So first off, I've said this already on a bunch of different streams. Go to any woke church. Go to any woke religious building. They'll have the LGBTQIA plus flag, not even the old gay pride flag. They'll have the BLM version of the LGBT plus flag now that exists. You have so many people in the Black Lives Matter movement that'll advocate for their woke positions and say that God supports them. And then talk about Islamists. Go into Islam for a second and how that plays a role in the intersectional hierarchy. You think any of those people are atheists? So yeah, there are atheists that are in the woke movement for sure. There were woke people, for instance, that took over the new atheist movement. But this idea that wokeism is entirely atheistic, and it's filled with only atheists, that's a bunch of nonsense. Going back into what James, you and I were saying earlier about how the Carl Benjamins of the world a few years ago said, I don't like the regressive left because they defended religion. Yes,
and it's really, no, I firmly agree with you, and I think Carl is missing the thread a little bit here. He's saying that these people are atheists, but there's a lot of other things at play in what they believe and how they believe. And as you know, Tom, all of us have different reasons for being atheists. None of us are exactly the same, and none of our beliefs, even within atheism, are exactly the same. We are not dogmatic in our view of atheism. All of us have gradients of color within us, unlike some religious people, for example. But one of the things that he's missing, and you pointed it out, is even if these people might be religiously an atheist, if you will, philosophically, they treat their social ideologies as some sort of grander metaphysical force. So they aren't not religious. They are by definition religious, but just in the most vulgar materialistic way. He's correct about that, but it doesn't mean they're not acting as if they're not religious. They are, in fact, some of the most religious people I've ever met and seen, and they will reinforce that to the death, literally. So to me, that doesn't sound like much of an atheist, even if you don't make a faith claim about the man upstairs.
And then going into James Lindsay for a second. James Lindsay, yes, he is, I think, seen as still as an anti-woke liberal. I think that's how he would mostly describe himself. But this is James Lindsay, the same James Lindsay who's on our advisory board, by the way, at Atheists for Liberty, who goes to Turning Point USA conferences every single year and sits next to Christian pastors and Charlie Kirk, an evangelical Christian. He hangs out at more conservative and Republican events than anyone else in the Atheists for Liberty network that I know. Okay, and he's not even on the right. He's not even a Republican, but he hangs out with that many people on the right. I would argue he's basically near there. That's just my personal view when it comes to ideology, at least. And you have Carl Benjamin calling James Lindsay one of the crazy liberals. And this is with respect to you, Carl. I don't know if you or any of your staff or people at the Lotus Eaters are going to see this, but if James Lindsay is one of the crazy liberals, like hang out at right-wing everything, where are the normal liberals? What's a normal liberal in your eyes?
Right? And the problem that they have with me attacking the root of liberalism is they don't have an alternative. They don't. So what I'm telling them is essentially, you are not a moral person. I'm going to tear this up and look at these disgusting rotten roots. We're going to throw this away, and they will be set adrift with literally no moral compass. That's why they're so upset by me doing this. So I have to say, well, okay, was Christianity that bad, actually?
Well, then, from an atheist perspective, that's what I find really interesting over the years when I've been watching I don't know if it's fair to say a political evolution, but I think
it's definitely been an evolution.
You very accurately point out that a lot of the classical liberals, the secular atheists, when push comes to shove, either they don't have an objective moral framework to stand on, or the moral framework that they're operating upon is actually just based off of Christianity, which they simultaneously, oftentimes derive. So personally,
okay, can we pause that? Can we pause that for a second? Can we?
Yeah.
I want to do away with this really ridiculous notion that every moral action possibly ever conceived of comes from Christianity, because to me that is I mean, yes, we've grown up in a quote unquote Christian culture. I will accept that. America is a very Christian country, sure. But if I'm to follow that example all the way through, was there no moral people before Christianity? Was there no moral civilizations with anything worth copying or attaining? Well, the last time I checked, we very much so value the Greeks and the Romans, who were not perfect people by any stretch of the imagination, and had lots of moral decay in their societies. But we still do as well. We like to pretend like we don't, however. So,
and the idea that Sargon in like 2016, 17, 18, 19, already with him, questioning social justice and wokeism and leftism, the idea that he would have even said or conceded to something like that is just ridiculous. So the only thing I agree with him here, right, with what he's saying right now is, yeah, there definitely was an evolution, because this is not the Sargon that I remember. And I'm not talking about Sargon formerly on the left, now gone to the right. I'm talking about rational atheist Sargon, left or right, whatever, who was correct about opposing dogma of all kinds. That's not the Sargon that I remember.
Yes. And I mean, just with respect to Carl, right? By no stretch of the imagination am I saying that Carl is not intelligent, or that he doesn't have a lot to offer, or that he's not, in my, from my point of view, if we're going to call Carl the former king of classical liberalism, totally a joke there, by the way, if we're going to say he's conservative now, of the conservatives that are, trending in the sort of Jordan Peterson direction, he's the one I probably respect the most and think he has the most to offer, for sure. But it still doesn't mean you can't occasionally miss the thread,
Yeah, absolutely.
Skeptical about classical liberalism. Where should our morality and things like the concept of natural rights derive from? Like, how do you reconcile that? What do you personally use as your moral framework?
I use tradition.
Or are you going? Oh, so you're going to do the Jordan Peterson route?
Yeah, it seems to be something that is true. It is absolutely true that we've inherited a moral tradition from our ancient past, and it absolutely has a proven track record of results.
I'll just quickly chime in here. The thinkers of the Enlightenment, right? The way they framed our civilization from the 18th century onwards, they wanted to do whatever they could to not take various philosophical concepts from the medieval world, from the monarchies of Europe. Yeah, they took English common law out, but they didn't besides that, our ancient past, yeah, Greco-Roman values and things like that, but this idea that it's all derived from Christianity, the founding fathers wanted to do whatever they could to not be Britain, to not be France, to not be the Holy Roman Empire. And so, again, you wouldn't have even seen Carl Benjamin, in my view, of 2019 or 2020 or maybe 2018, 17, saying what he's saying now. He would have attributed much of what we see as Western civilization, to Christians as individuals and deists as individuals and atheists as individuals, but based on Enlightenment values and Enlightenment principles that are very much different from this view of Christian Europe and Christian monarchism.
And I mean, it is very important to note that Sargon Carl is British. He is fundamentally, much to his own chagrin, he is European, not just British. So there is a difference in the sort of cultural history of England and America. I would venture a guess, and I haven't kept up with Lotus Eaters, so I'm not 100% sure if he has said this or if he will, but I would venture a guess that he would probably say that America fundamentally is a liberal experiment, which is also why we're experiencing so many of the issues that we are now. Because we don't have that long cultural pedigree. There isn't really that to pull back from. As you said, a lot of the fathers of the Enlightenment, they might not have inspired Enlightenment in their own areas, but almost all of them, Rousseau and Locke especially, played a huge role in the American project in creating the foundations for what our founding fathers would use to create America. So I would venture he would probably say that the American project as a whole has rotten bits at its core.
Yeah. When America has outlasted the British Empire, when everybody wants to come to America because of the freedoms and liberties that we have, and Britain is being consumed by Islamism and theocracy and the common freedoms of the standard Englishman being completely eroded.
Yes, and if you want to continue the video, we can obviously come back to this later. But I would want to ask you, Tom, how much of that do you think how much of this do you think is coming from sort of the erosion that Carl is seeing in his own country, and where the homeland of some of the values that he does still hold most dear? He really does. I mean, if you had to ask me, I think in his heart there is still that pumping heart of liberalism inside him, but he has seen so much and been through so much, both in his own political campaigns and also just seeing what's happening on his own streets, that he is now entirely black-pilled. Do you think that has a lot to do with his sort of progression to this point?
I don't know, because Islamism was already a problem in the UK over the last several years, even when he had his different views on this. You could be a Christian or be an atheist and be opposed to Islamofascism and what's happening in Europe right now. That hasn't, things might have increased and have gotten worse, but the problem was still very much visible in places like London and in other cities in the UK and throughout Europe. So that's the annoyance that I have here. You could be against Islamism and be against wokeism and still not have to believe in the supernatural to combat Big Red. I would agree. Combat Trigglypuff or Dawa time.
I would agree.
It's annoying.
Now, before we move on from this, I would think that I would agree with you. However, I think when Carl was starting out, when these sort of online intellectual types, if you will, were starting out, especially in the atheist space, sort of went after the atheism movement, sort of splintered off into different factions, that is precisely what did happen, whereas the Christian faction did not splinter off. It is important to note that. The atheist faction fell into two halves, as I will always like to say. There's the humanist Stoic school, and then there's the nihilist school that sort of fell into progressivism and this sort of cultural Marxism, if we want to call it that. That's the buzzword nowadays. But the Christian factions, they stayed unified. And if I had to guess, I think that Carl is looking at this movement that used to have so much promise, that being New Atheism, and saying, what the hell happened? But then looking at, the Christians section and saying, wait, they're still actually kind of unified, and they're still, trudging on forward while we're fighting over, these metaphysical claims in different directions now,
I very much admire his intelligence. And so, from somebody who should, in my view, see the writing on the wall, he should also see the statistics that show that, yes, even though the Christians are very much unified, the numbers of affiliations of Christianity, regardless of how many, based Christian videos, no matter how many like radical Zoomers try to share some stuff about Catholicism or Orthodoxy, or how much Jordan Peterson tries to talk about the value of faith on stage, they're still going to lose. They're still going to lose at the end of the day. And so if I were Carl Benjamin, if I were trying to come up with these philosophical solutions to save civilization, I would conclude that the only solutions, and I say this a million times now, are secular solutions. That's the Carl Benjamin that I used to watch.
And make no mistake, right? If this cultural Christianity trend grows into a real threat of Christian nationalism, as we're beginning to see even here in the States, none of these people who I believe are, as you said, incredibly intelligent, should believe that their sort of faux faith, if you will, the Jordan Peterson type faith, or the Ayaan Hirsi Ali type of faith, is going to stop those Christian nationalist types from persecuting them just as hard, because they know that their convictions of cultural Christianity are not real, faith claims, are not truth claims to them. They're simply a tool, which makes you, the last time I checked, that makes you a heretic in their eyes, the last time I checked.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because once the Groypers of the world, or the hardcore Zoomer Christian nationalists of the world, if they ever won the war, if they ever took power, Carl Benjamin would be seen as a heretic, Jordan Peterson would be seen as a heretic or degenerate. If anything, and this is with respect for these people on a wide array of other cultural and political issues outside of religion, if anything, I would argue that things like what Carl is saying on Lauren Shen's channel, it's only creating more Groypers. I think it's only going to create more hardcore Christian nationalists, because, okay, if that framework is all of classical liberalism and atheism and the stuff that really birthed the Enlightenment and this opposition to supernatural thinking and the new atheist movement that followed a few centuries later, if that stuff is all based in mumbo jumbo, not tradition and ancient prayer and value or whatever, I know I'm taking some things out of context here, but I'm just generalizing their kind of arguments here. They're going to be seen as if you're a follower of Carl and of Lauren Shen now, and you see these kind of arguments against all of Enlightenment-based civilization, what's to stop you from then concluding, might as well go all the way then? I might as well believe the most literal and extreme and passionate views of this stuff. If all of classical liberalism and new atheism and secularism is a cancer, then I might as well join the most radical force to eradicate this kind of degeneracy. So this is why I get really, really annoyed at this kind of IDW-ish Christianity, because they're only creating a Christian futurist Catholic pipeline.
And it's not even just that too. I think our sort of secular type thinkers, the sort of anti-SJWs of old, if you will, I think a lot of them are falling into a very 2016 type trap, where, remember in 2016 when former President Donald Trump was running, nobody thought he stood a chance, and it was all fun and games, and you could make the memes, you could laugh at it, and then when everything started to happen, oh no, and it's like, okay, well, now we're starting to see that. Years ago it was Nick Fuentes, and he started America First, and there was the Groyper movement and everything, and they were kind of a laughing stock, and then over time they've gained a lot of traction, and even if they might not be as at full capacity, they have spawned into existence this sort of Christian nationalist movement that has only gained more and more popularity. And I don't know about you, but it permeates my Instagram feed, it permeates my YouTube feed. There's so many different news articles about it more, and it's sort of feeding this new cultural revolution, if you will, that I think is really starting to heat up more and more.
And not only that, not only is it a good chunk of your feed and part of my feed as well. If it's a good chunk of your YouTube audience, right? If you're a YouTube content creator like Sargon, Carl Benjamin, you shouldn't pivot and say, well, I might as well follow what they're saying. You should be alarmed. You should be alarmed at what the audience is becoming, not to sound like some woke type person. Well, your audience is becoming quite bigoted, so that's a problem. There is a rational conclusion that you could point to of, if my audience is saying things that I know from a non-woke, non-crazy perspective are objectively, weird. This is not the audience that I had even a few years ago, of people on the left and the right, who are critiquing dogma of all kinds. Maybe I should try to find a way to combat this kind of thing, to make sure that people aren't radicalized into crazy stuff that does seek to destroy the Western world, does seek to destroy Enlightenment-based civilizations. So I am very concerned. We're not even like halfway through the video, so I bet there's going to be even more stuff to comment on. But I hope Carl Benjamin does see this, and I hope he does, say, you know what, maybe these Atheists for Liberty guys, these guys have a point. They're not trying to combat me from this political opposite perspective. They're critiquing out of genuine concern.
Let's hope.
A lot of Christians are going to say, yeah, but it does lean very heavily on Christianity, doesn't it? And I'll say, yes, sure. I'm not opposed to Christian morality. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, frankly. I don't really see what the objection to it is, actually. The objection from the liberal atheist seems to be, I don't believe in God. It's like, okay, but you're not saying you don't like the morality then. What you're saying is you need it to be rationally justified. But in every other case, you're prepared to be utilitarian and say, well, it just works. So why can't you be utilitarian in this case and just say, well, it just works? I don't need to personally believe in God to see the effect of Christianity and the good it seems to do for actual Christians as well. Like, if I met Christians who are bad people or mean-spirited or just doing immoral things, I'd be like, okay, well, I don't want them to be like that. But I don't ever meet Christians like that. I'm sure someone will say, well, what about the Westboro Baptist Church? It's like, okay, but I'm looking around, bro, and I just don't see any Westboro Baptist Church. You know what I mean? Like, that seems to be like 5 really dysgenic, awful people who are using Christianity as a cover. There seem to be lots of good people who are good Christian people, and they seem to be getting on just fine. So I'm really not terribly averse to this. But the point you're making, the question you're raising, is exactly legitimate. Well, if liberalism can't be the moral axis around which the modern atheist revolves, where does he go? And that's scary for a lot of people. That puts them in a position where they genuinely don't know how to feel about themselves. Because the thing is, it's entirely possible that a lot of the things we're doing are actually really, really immoral. And I'm not going to mention any particular movements that are concerned about gender and are doing terrible things to kids or anything. But yeah, it might well be that we're in a position where we're doing really immoral things. So.
Right. And I think
not most of us. Not most atheists.
Yeah.
Not most, you praised an entire organization a few years ago for not being that, Carl.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm getting particularly fed up with this sort of Pascal's wager argument that's the pseudo Pascal's wager that's being put forward, that's saying, well, if you do away with this objective moral standard and you say that you're immoral without this, it becomes really scary for a lot of people. I frankly don't care. To use a Christian maxim, pick up your cross and keep moving. Okay, like with or without that cross and with or without that God, you still have so many different ethical and moral dilemmas to weigh out, and you won't be perfect in it. And I think that people who act otherwise, they're fooling themselves. And so sort of use this argument that, well, it's really scary to feel and look at. and because you have to look within yourself and improve. Okay, should that not be the goal of your entire existence, to realize your shortcomings and also to grow in that? I mean, I'm a big follower of Stoicism, so that for me that's a huge thing, and believe me, I'm not perfect at all in it, but I think there's a lot of value to be had in realizing that you are in fact an imperfect creature. And you are marred by some sort of evolutionary original sin, if you will, and that you are the closest relative. Your closest relative is a chimpanzee. You are half a chromosome away from it, so you can't be perfect either. But the answer to that isn't to look to some solution that gives bad answers for questions that we can't answer ourselves.
Yeah, and this is why I view this as a total cop-out. This is why I'm totally against this kind of grifting, because I think deep down, Carl Benjamin knows that there are plenty of atheists, even in the millions, who can live decent moral lives without God, without religion, without Christianity as this framework. But this is just becoming so potent in certain culture war circles now, to where it's just like every other week I find another person I used to look up to saying these things that are totally not true, that I think they know are totally not true. It's going to be great content for the channel, but I don't think great for our country as a whole, for the Western world as a whole, to see these people, these so-called champions of free speech, attacking the very foundations of it and attacking the logical conclusions that people have about the cosmos in general.
Exactly.
The only thing I can seem to agree with Carl Benjamin on is in the beginning, when he was saying, well, I'm still an atheist. He hasn't pulled, what unfortunately Ayan Hirsi Ali pulled yet. But and this is, again, I say this with respect, Carl, it's like, I get a watch out. Is it only going to be a matter of time before, in your journey here, you're just gonna say that you've now ditched atheism entirely?
Yes, and I think one of the things that really disheartens me about where this video is going is that if this does happen, right, and we abandon atheism and we're all forced away from it in droves to become cultural Christians for one reason or another, does that not make the contributions of people like Stephen Fry, like Christopher Hitchens, like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris, does that not make what they went through and what they did mean nothing? I mean, if anything, that would, by definition, be doing away with some of the greatest thinkers of our modern age, in my opinion, and this sort of entire time period where this was very important. I think that the answer should not be to run to some sort of cultural solution based on bad presuppositions, but it's to fight that fight in your own backyard. If we had just enough atheists, enough secular humanists that were really secular humanists that could get together and actually genuinely fight against the sort of nihilistic progressive atheists, and the super progressive atheists by that, not like the Destiny types who are progressive in some aspects, totally different, the extremists, if you will. If we only had enough people who could really fight that, I think that would be worth our time. Because I'm not going to give up or cede ground to people who I don't think actually have my best interest at heart. I don't believe that they do, and I'm not going to abandon my beliefs for the sake of their comfort either.
Yeah, or for benefit in my career, to make my audience happy, to maybe give me some extra money, to get me on stage at some kind of maybe right-wing event or some anti-woke thing here and there. Because if you don't actually believe in what you're actually saying, it's like, what's the point of engaging in this kind of activism? What's the point of making this kind of content? This is why it's like, I woke up and I saw this and I went, oh no, here goes another one. Anyways, we'll move forward.
That's probably more likely than a lot of center leftist classical liberals would like to admit. And it's interesting because the way you talk about Christianity, it reminds me of two people, Ayan Hirsi Ali and also Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you followed Ayan Hirsi Ali. She's someone who
not closely.
She previously underwent female genital mutilation as a child. I forget which country specifically, but somewhere on the African continent. And she eventually ended up Yeah, I think that sounds right. She eventually ended up moving to Europe and was for a long time at the forefront of the, I guess, humanist, secularist online movement. That's how I became familiar with her work. She does a lot of great things and is obviously a very vocal critic of Islam. Not that long ago, she actually came forward in support of Christianity. And I believe now even calls herself a Christian. And
Yeah, and she doesn't even believe in the Holy Trinity. She doesn't actually address in that article any actual claims relating to belief in God, but just says that she's a Christian because, oh, well, wokeism is a problem. And I say this with respect to Ayan Hirsi as well. I'm a founding member of the Clarity Coalition, but there are plenty of members of the Clarity Coalition right now who do not agree with Ayan's article and her stance on things. Plenty of anti-Islamism, anti-woke, pure, good, rational people. By the way, not just people that are center-left liberals or people on the left, people on the right as well, who don't even agree with her stance on that matter. So she doesn't actually believe in the actual tenets of Christianity, which actually, in my view, is disrespectful to Christians. So you have Ayan being that example, and then let's see also what is said about Jordan.
a lot of people, a lot of these atheist types that I was following, they watched her video and their critique was like, well, okay, it seems like you're not actually professing a testimony that we would see in a lot of Christian churches where you express how you've been saved, how you've come to have faith. This almost seems more utilitarian, as in these are the reasons why I believe Christian values and traditions are superior. That's not necessarily being a Christian, though. And I think Jordan Peterson, he does something similar. You have that infamous debate with Sam Harris where you go around for, I don't even know how many hours talking about what actually is truth. Jordan Peterson, he always says, and I've asked him about this pointedly in interviews, like, do you believe in God? Well, I behave as if I do, and that's really the same. But is it though? Is it that that's not the same?
It's not the same.
No,
it's not the same.
Mm-hmm. And Jordan knows that, by the way. He might like to pretend that that's different. In fact, if I can make some sort of semi-obscure reference, in his I'm going through his lecture series, the Personality and Its Transformations on YouTube. It's from 2014, so it's before he became famous. And he's discussing in the second chapter, he's discussing religious iconography and sort of the claims to it. And he even makes very particular mention in that video, in the beginning of it, I believe, that it's incredibly hard to separate any sort of idea of metaphysical heavenly place and or secondary form of being, like a soul, with separate that from wish thinking and separate that from mythological ideals. So he knows that, and if he really truly was a Christian, he would just say it. The amount of social clout and money he would get from saying that is insane. He knows he could say it, but he doesn't, because in his heart, much like Carl and much like Ayan and much like, to her credit as well, Lauren, they don't believe these things. But I don't think that acting like you do believe these things is going to do you any favors in the long term.
Yeah, I don't know about Lauren. Lauren might actually genuinely believe, but when it comes to literally all the others, I don't think for a second that they actually do. For everybody who wants to watch, check out Alex O'Connor's video on Jordan Peterson, where he says that he believes Jordan Peterson is an atheist. He is that new atheist type man of science. He always disagreed with the new atheists in that he never thought atheists were victims, but he always, for many years, had this immense respect for Steven Pinker, for Richard Dawkins. He was part of that circle of thinkers for a very, very, very long time. I also suggest, by the way, everybody checking out Alex O'Connor's recent interview with Richard Dawkins, where they actually talk about Jordan Peterson and Jordan Peterson's view on religion, because it gets into the exact same things that we're talking about here. So we'll keep going through, but it's just this continued cultural Christian word salad at this point that we got to keep fighting back against.
That's not the same, practically speaking and theologically speaking. Like, I mean, I pay my taxes. Is that the same as me believing that taxes are just? Absolutely not. Would you say that kind of encapsulates where you are personally?
I totally agree with the frame that this is not sufficient to say that you're a Christian. If merely, one can accidentally behave in Christian ways and not be a Christian. And I do think I don't think I would ever be able to claim to be a Christian without having a sincere belief in something. I think that would be wrong, and I don't think I could bring myself to do it.
That's where I agree with Carl. At least
So
he's saying
based.
that. Thanks, Carl. But let's see if you say something that makes me disagree with you again.
But I think that I think that the secular liberal atheist types like myself need to understand that actually there are things about the human experience that can't really be rationally classified and calculated. And
True, but I would say instead that we don't have every single answer yet to what's going on in the universe and the cosmos, and we have our best scientists, looking into it. For some of these answers, we might not have them for another 10, 20, 100 to 200 years, just like how you had plenty of the 18th century Enlightenment thinkers never really conclude that they were atheists. I think with the exception of Thomas Paine, but deists. They saw the world in a certain lens and perspective at that time and came to the best conclusions about society at that time. And I would argue they were thinking centuries ahead on many respects. But that doesn't mean that we all need to go back to church. We're gonna sing the Gregorian chants as if we're from 1209. It just means we have more work to do. That's why science is so important. That's why the scientific method is so important. And it's not so 2010 or 2014 for me to say that. Oh, Thomas talking about science again, blah, blah, blah. No, it's still very much legitimate. Cool, just wanted to make sure you didn't have anything to chime in on.
No, yes, yeah, I firmly agree with you. I mean, I think he's correct for sure. I think that just because there are some sort of miraculous claims, if you will, or miraculous feelings is a better way to put that, doesn't mean that they are divinely inspired or religiously derived. I'll give a really good example. When I think about the fact that every single living thing on this earth shares a certain amount of DNA. Like we as humans are related to every other living thing, and at least some percentage. I think the lowest thing we're related to is like a jellyfish, and we only share like 27% of our DNA with one kind of jellyfish. I think it is. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's very, very low. But when I think about the fact that we all have similar building blocks, and then we are all connected, and that there are certain studies, several studies, in fact, that go into I think they call it rooting yourself, where you'll run around outside in the dirt and in the grass, and you'll feel better, and the sun will be shining on you, and everything in general will sort of uplift you in some sort of sense, and that we are all connected via nature. That's a really beautiful experience to me, and a really wondrous thing to think about. Or the fact that we're the only humans left. We don't have any more human subspecies that are left. We're one of the only types of creatures that don't have any more subspecies left, but we made it. That's also crazy to me and insane to think about. But it doesn't, make me want to look to a god for it all of a sudden. If anything, it makes me very glad that I know what I do know, and that we do have the science that we do have, because it lets me appreciate, wow, yeah, it was pretty unlikely that the universe popped into existence, but it did, and I'm here now. So that's awesome.
You won the lottery for doing it.
Exactly.
Whether we believe that it's divine inspiration or not, the experience of having the spiritual experience itself is a part of human nature and contains within it something that is good and something that does good for people. And so I find myself looking back into the traditions of England and thinking there is something a bit spiritual about it for me. As in, I realize that actually I'm part of a river that has been rushing for 1,000+ years, and I'm just at my point of that rushing river, and then my children will come after me, and their children will come after them, and you realize that actually you are part of something bigger than yourself, and actually there is legitimacy to it. The reason it's lasted so long is because it was good, and because
I totally agree. I think being a part, like, not everything, like, tradition overall can be very positive, reproducing and having children and descendants to continue on your legacy and to continue to be a part of your country, and your history, that's not a bad thing at all. But why do we need to give a god in the sky the credit for that?
In particular, that what Carl just mentioned in particular, I sent you the definition for the word hirath before we started this,
You did.
which is the feeling, the sensation, the sensation of intense nostalgia and feeling for something that might not have ever even been, but that you feel connected to. I'll speak on my own personal experience with this. For me, my ancestry is a huge metric for that. I'm Greek, Danish, and Welsh. And so when I visited England, I felt so, there was something about the place, something about the fact that that's where a lot of my liberal ideas come from, something about the fact that this is where some of my family migrated from, that I felt so at home and so warm and at peace being there, and it felt really transcendent. And I have a couple of experiences that I would like to have. In Greece, for example, I have my lineage is Laconian, so it's Spartan in origin. And one of the things I'd really like to do is go and shed a drop of blood in the fields of Thermopylae to say that I'm also there with my ancestors. Which, cringe if you will, that's fine. But for me, that's like a really huge deal. And I understand what he says when he says, like, this is just my place in the river. That's great. That's an amazing feeling. What does that have to do with the religious claim? If I can draw on the words of Christopher Hitchens very quickly here, he says in God's Not Great, and I think the first chapter of God's Not Great, putting it mildly is the name of the chapter. He discusses going to Greek Orthodox service the day after Easter, or the day or on Easter Sunday, and he says, I could feel, even if I could not believe, the words that are spoken on the lips of every joyous observer during the resurrection. Christos anesti eleithos anesti. Christ is risen, he's risen indeed. And it's like, yeah, he could feel that. It was in him because the happiness was there. It doesn't mean he has to believe it. Just like I don't have to believe the metaphysical claims to feel reverent inside of that old cathedral, for example.
Yeah. You can respect the past. You can respect the fact that religion at that time was humanity's best answer to where the cosmos came from, where the universe came from. There were plenty of things that were built that did help humanity, especially in old Europe and stuff like that, in the name of religion. Does that mean that we still need to carry on with all of it now? Does that mean you can't have that amazing awe that you get from these experiences as a human being in your community, in your country, without attributing it to faith? And this is the problem. There are plenty of things that the Jordan Petersons of the world say that are totally correct. Totally correct. Mm-hmm. Peterson is tapping into some actual legitimate cultural issues that we as humans on a biological level every single day face. But the conclusions, I think, are not genuine, and they're not actually personal. Half of them are just political, in the name of the culture wars, in the name of the current year, and what we have to say for the right network or the right think tank or the right nonprofit or the right YouTube channel or for this kind of YouTube audience to say in the moment. And that's the real problem with all this. You can still have plenty of these amazing conclusions from plenty of people from plenty of different years without attributing it to, I'm sorry, fairy tales. I don't care if it sounds juvenile. It's still true.
Yeah, I would agree.
So we'll go ahead and play the last few minutes of the video, and let's see if anything else interesting is said.
Because it worked and because it was effective and successful. And so the moral values that have been built up in this are time-tested. So they might seem weird. And one of my favorite things in the world is Edmund Burke's justification of prejudice. Prejudice is the solution to problems you've forgotten exist. And if you had just been prejudiced about something, you actually wouldn't be getting the problems that you're getting for failing to understand why the prejudice was there in the first place. Because prejudices are not actually irrational. They are the kind of articulated and inherited rights and wrongs that come out of our traditions. And so you don't know why you have a prejudice against something, but there is a kind of iterative function that has brought the prejudice into existence. And okay, I'm not saying we should be prejudiced, but I think that what this is saying to us is you think on too narrow a time scale when you do any kind of rationalistic thinking. You need to think on a very long time scale. You need to think in a very broad way as well. So you've got a much more three-dimensional view of what morality is, and then you
But I
realize that
suppose
actually
the
Sorry,
counter to that from a rationalist, materialist, almost nihilistic standpoint is that without that, I don't want to say supernaturalism, but the idea of looking at it from a macro scale through the generations, it almost becomes moot, right? There's a lot of people, the secular atheists, who will say, well, but why? Why does the concept of not only looking behind us, but in front of us for future tradition, for future generations, why does that intrinsically matter? And I think
Okay, so
I can
so
just give a
I
simple answer to that, but you can go first.
yeah, that's my least favorite argument of all time. One ill-informed atheist, or one atheist who doesn't know what they're talking about, which they do exist, right? And I don't know everything either, and it's fine if you don't, because we're all, like I said earlier, we're all on different steps in our own little, philosophical and religious / non-religious journeys, and it's okay. But one group of people who says that doesn't make that a rule applicable to all people in that group. So I don't actually, frankly, give a damn what the nihilist says if I'm not a nihilist. I don't ask that question. I can answer that question, but so it's as you said, it's a simple answer, and I look forward to hearing yours. But for me, that's a non sequitur. So what? This group of people doesn't, they can't answer that. They ask that question. Okay, well, I don't. Now where are we at?
Yeah. What about the atheists that want to have children and see their descendants live on past them to share their DNA? What about, the atheists who like the system of government and society that's been established, a society, by the way, that's been established predating them and their own self-nihilistic interests, want to keep that succeeding, in the years ahead? What about all the free thinkers and rationalists who knew in centuries past that they were going to die, who still wanted to, build something positive for people? Humans have done this, without religion in many cases for such a long time. But so I would even argue there are so many atheists that do think ahead. Look at the new atheists. Look at Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens. Look at Dawkins. Look at all of them. These are people that are, I know Hitchens unfortunately died, but a lot of these thinkers are actually senior citizens. They're up in age, and they're still fully at talking about biology, science, trying to understand the cosmos, trying to defend the Enlightenment or secular governance or the rights of atheists or freethinkers, and using skepticism. They don't have to do any of this stuff. They can just stay retired, maybe get a comfy salary, and just never go on camera, never have to say anything that could one day backfire against them in any sense, because that's the culture wars that we live in now. They could do that. We could all be comfy. I can, wrap up ship here at Atheists for Liberty, and we can all just be involved in the for-profit sector and just live our lives and not do anything to help others. And same with every single atheist, activist, thinker, philosopher, you name it. But we choose to still do stuff, and millions of atheists in this country and around the world still seek to live a life that'll help others once they're long gone.
I think if we're operating from a completely materialistic standpoint, there's not actually a good reason for that, which is why.
Well, hang on. I can argue that. There is, because essentially it requires us to admit that we are not.
Just one side comment. It's like Lauren Shan, in my view. She has gone so, in my opinion, gone so far to the right. She's she I know she's very much praised by the Goypers. It's just very sad to see where she's gone. But I'm not shocked with her. She's already been going in that direction, I think, for the past 2 to 3 years. But
quite as smart as we think we are. There are aspects of human life that can't be rationally considered. The philosopher Michael Oakeshott.
I feel like the Sam Harris types would disagree, but sorry, continue.
Well, they can disagree, but the thing is, we've got lots and lots and lots of examples of it, right? For example, you could read every manual that's ever been written about painting, You could read absolutely every piece of work, 100 million words on how to paint, but you will never produce a good painting. You'll never produce the Mona Lisa, because actually there are aspects to painting that cannot simply be described. They have to be felt. They have to be done. They have to have been engaged with on a practical level. This is what philosopher Michael Oakeshott called practical wisdom, practical knowledge, and book learning he would call technical knowledge, something you can impart to one another. But the problem is, whenever you are describing something, you are abstracting away from the thing itself. And as John Locke pointed out, all abstraction is also subtraction. To identify, for example, again, going back to my remote control, what this is, I have to subtract away from a bunch of things. If I want to say, well, this is white, it's got buttons on it, it's like, okay, that's true, but I'm not telling you the weight of the thing. I'm not telling you what it's made of. I'm not telling you, like, there are millions and millions and millions of things about this you could pick out, but I'm only focusing on the ones I think are important. And so all of that information is being left behind as I point out what this is. And this is the problem with absolutely everything. So there are going to be things that you didn't know you should describe in order to properly encapsulate what the experience of the thing is. And the only way you learn that kind of knowledge is by doing the thing itself. Like, you can't tell me how I should feel when I put the paintbrush to the paper and when I swish it around to create a particular form, right? You can't actually describe that. And and even if you could, would it mean anything to me if I could understand it? If you're like, okay, use X amount of pounds of pressure and you do this angle and this speed, I'd be like, oh, I can't interpret that. But what I can do is practice doing it and get the muscle memory myself until eventually I know exactly how that works. And eventually I can become like.
Okay, the only thing I'll just comment here, muscle memory, science, nothing supernatural, nothing Christian about that. Nothing Jewish or Islamic or Hindu about any of that stuff whatsoever. And yes, it's part of his materialistic explanation. But this is why I think, like, Carl Benjamin going down this cultural Christianity path is such a waste of time. He's still defending the human experience in many regards from this atheist perspective. And it's like I have to see this, and it's like we got to comment on this stuff. But it's like we shouldn't even have to. That this video shouldn't even exist.
This is another example of Carl at his best. Unironically, like this last 5 minutes has been phenomenal. Like his defense and explanation here is completely correct. There's nothing whatsoever that's incorrect about it. The crass part of my brain kind of wants to say, well, you could always pray about it and you'll figure out what how to paint without ever touching a painting. But he's fundamentally correct. So I'm really interested to see, because he was able to push back on Lauren's statement. I'm really interested to see, how are you going to tie this back into why it's culturally relevant to be Christian, why it's important. I don't know where he's going to go from here. But I'm interested to see in the last 3 minutes what he'll say.
Yeah, we'll find out in just a moment.
Like a Leonardo da Vinci, but that can never be imparted other than through direct experience. And so that we have a whole world of knowledge there, and we actually have an entire library full of philosophy that's generally just called wisdom philosophy, because that's what we're talking about. It's wisdom that comes from direct experience, and not intelligence and intellect and technique that comes from book learning. And this shows that on one side you have something that requires a high intelligence and requires learning capacity and various cognitive functions that are all well and good. But on the other side, you have a form of knowledge that one of the key components to it is time. You can't get the knowledge of what happens over and over and over from any other way other than doing it repeatedly and experiencing over a period of time. And so the rationalist will always be stopped at that point where they say, well, look, I can't identify any negative consequences from this thing, and therefore there are no negative consequences. However, the wise person who has done this or seen this done many times will say, well, if you do that, this will happen, and I'm sure of it. And they'll say, well, you can't show that it's deductively going to be true. No, I can't deductively show it's going to be true, but I can inductively show that it's going to be true. And there we go. And it turns out to be true. So we can argue this case.
That was amazing until the last 30 seconds when he became Jordan Peterson for a very short amount of time. I have no idea. I know what he was trying to say, and I'll try to clear it up if I possibly can. He's trying to say that there are certain cultural traditions that would explain why certain things are good and certain things are bad, and they're not just things that you can BS around at. You have to inductively know them throughout time. That's why there was the time connection there. He's sort of correct, except he was bad with the example of painting for using that argument, because there are some people, as we know, who are gifted enough to pick up a brush for the first time and paint extraordinarily well based off no other, no experience, no skill, just being able to BS and figure it out. A lot of painters that I've met have been like that, who are just naturally gifted. You show them how to draw one time without them ever drawing before, and all of a sudden, boom. Right? That does not, so that kind of dissuades the whole you must know this over time, because that's not always the case. Overall, it's correct. He's wrong on the functionality of it having to happen every time. In terms of him saying that this gives you a way to fight for this tradition, no, it doesn't. And I want to pull the audience's attention to the original Four Horsemen conversation, featuring Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett, and Harris, when they're all
his old DC apartment, right?
Yes, and his
them sitting in a circle.
I think they're in the Wyoming apartment is what it's called, the Wyoming, I believe it is, It was great video. It is the definition of brain porn. I'm just saying, you guys should really check it out if you haven't. But one of the things that he and Dawkins, I believe, discussed the most is that, yes, you can use these sort of spaces, these sort of traditions, if you will, for the cultural relevancy, for the community group aspect of it. For instance, using a church for a funeral is a good function for a church, even if you don't believe in the truth of the church. But that doesn't advance the claim that culturally the entire thing is good. That just says that it gave you a good thing for this one case. For example, I could think of many things. For example, Mother Teresa of Calcutta being one of them that are bad culturally for, in a Christian aspect for many regions. For instance, Mother Teresa went to Ireland to campaign against them changing the laws on divorce in the 90s. And that is a Christian function by a group of Christian functionaries that are reinforcing a cultural control on a group of people. And so just because it gave them some sort of morality, just because it gave them some sort of comfort, not allowing some poor Irish woman to get away from her wife-beating incestuous husband, is not a good cultural result that comes from such a practice. I think that a similar case can be made once again with Mother Teresa when she says that people need to give more money in India, and her campaigning against family planning in India, whether you agree with it or not. But to say that contraceptives are worse than AIDS is kind of interesting. That's pretty ridiculous in my view, and that would be another example of a straightforward result from a cultural phenomenon caused by Christianity that is not good for the culture it's in. So you can't. That doesn't give you any argument to actually stand on. It just gives you certain pluses, just like there are a lot of pluses to a lot of things, but we wouldn't say that they're all good.
I just honestly hope that Carl Benjamin does not continue to go down this kind of path of trashing atheism, trashing the secular origins of the Enlightenment. I liked some of his takes there, but unfortunately, I think he is just part of this continued trend of a small amount of anti-woke atheists who are now going down this cultural Christian pipeline. And I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's productive. It makes our job even harder. And then for anybody who says, well, where is that secular community? Where is that secular alternative? That's not woke. That's not filled with this mind virus. That's us. An entire nationwide organization. We have members around the world, and anybody can watch these streams and these videos from around the world. That's us. There are secular alternatives and secular outlets that are there. and just throwing all of it away and saying, "Oh no, we just all have to go back to church, or all we have to be these cultural Christians now." That's not helpful for anybody. And you can clearly see that Carl Benjamin is still an atheist, still is trying to have a rationalist kind of conclusion for some of these things. I think his conclusions are some of his conclusions are baseless, and it makes our lives and our jobs a lot harder. And we're not going to pull any punches anymore. And Carl, if you see this, if you see this video, if any of the staffers of the Lotus Eaters, you guys see this video, feel free to contact us, info@atheistsforliberty.org. We'll have you on the channel, happily discuss things with you. You can go on your show too, debate or friendly dialogue, whatever you guys want to do. But it's just disheartening to see, and we need to comment on more of this kind of content that comes up on our feeds.
Yes, I firmly agree. I share your sort of sadness for the Carl's current political evolution a little bit, his thought process and how it's changed. I'm still an amazingly huge fan of you, Carl, or as I know you better, Sargon. And if you do see this, it all comes from a place of pure love and joy for a lot of things. You ironically are one of the reasons I am who I am and why I think the way that I think. So I will forever be grateful to you for those contributions. I really just hope that you understand the fire you're playing with, and that this is in some aspect a Promethean curse a little bit. So don't stray too far from the herd a little bit, I would say.
Absolutely. And look at this. People like you, people like me who've consumed his content and so many other similar people's content throughout the years, these people have made us into the people that we are today. Mm-hmm. And we are evidence that you can be a rational new atheist type, not buy into the woke agenda, and still come to good, rational scientific conclusions about the cosmos and about our society, like aspects of human tradition and human emotion and the human experience. You can have that best of both worlds. You don't have to go back into the pews or give credit to the supernatural or supernatural ways of thinking for that. And I think Carl knows that too. So Carl, again, I'll say it again, if you see this, would be more than happy to engage in a discussion with you on that. And for everybody watching here, thank you all so much for tuning in. Become a member of Atheists for Liberty today at atheistsforliberty.org. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, see more content, and follow us on all social media platforms. James, thanks so much for being a part of this this video review here. We're going to be uploading a lot more kinds of content like this. So guys, share this around, and we'll see you next time.